Hello, everybody. I'd like to tell you about my father a little bit. The title of this video is My Father, the Disposable Male. Um, my father was a disposable male, okay? He was self-sacrificing, he was hardworking, loving towards my mother, and he was admired by everyone he met. He was killed in a tragic accident a few years ago. And when people pass on, it's customary to hear that, quote, he was a good man or she was a good mother, etc. But people absolutely loved my father, and I really had no idea how many did until his funeral. My mother rented an 800-seat church for the funeral services, and I was worried that the venue was just too large and that it was risky, because if only a couple hundred people came to the funeral, it would look like the funeral was sparsely attended. Now, I showed up the day of the funeral as people were gathering, and my father he was quite religious. I think he would say he was more spiritual, but I would consider him to be a religious man. And his friends were putting on a worship service prior to the actual funeral service. So there were people already there when I arrived, and I was surprised at what I saw to be about 400 people already there. The place was already about half full, and the service hadn't even started, just the worship part of it. There was a band playing, and people were singing Christian songs, and I went up to the front where there was a seat reserved for me. And the funeral went on for literally hours, 4 hours long in total, which for me at the time, it didn't even seem like an hour had gone by. But people came up to the front in lines, one on each side of the room of the auditorium where there were microphones placed. And they said all kinds of great things about my father. And when I stood up to thank everyone, I turned around for the first time since I had arrived and viewed the auditorium, and there was a sea of people. It sat 800 people, but it appeared that there were 200 to 300 people standing in the back behind the last rows of the seats. And in total, we served 1,136 catered meals that day. Now, I'm going to be very frank with you here. My mother, clearly, she was devastated. And her cries were of a soul-shattered victim who had lost everything all at once. And yet, it was hard for me to take pity on her because of how she treated my father my entire life. It was a weird juxtaposition. My mother was domineering, emotionally aggressive, belittling, fault-finding. At times it seemed she despised him. And here she was, weeping at his tragic absence. My father took all of her abuse with grace and with a quiet, reserved demeanor. And I did not know my dad to be weak. He was tall, he was athletic, he was good-looking, intelligent, studious, kind, compassionate towards others. And he dedicated his life to serving my mother, while she dished out harsh criticism and pain. He took it even as he saw her squander his inheritance from his father, which of course is my inheritance, all the while working 12-hour days for years to keep up and to build a business that she financially controlled and squeezed every last drop out of in her philanthropy, for her Christian friends, and luxuries for herself. She threw my father a bone every now and again, and I don't mean to say that in a harsh sort of a way, but they bought Harley-Davidson motorcycles at one point. Now his cost $10,000, hers cost $30,000. I asked him one time why he didn't stand up to her and stand up for himself. His reply was disappointing, and yet it was understandable. He said, "If I stand up to your mother, it will cost me so much more than I'm willing to pay. It's going to be a huge price, and I'm just not willing to pay that price. I understood what he was saying, and she would have brought an absolute shitstorm of epic proportions were he to stand up to her, and he knew this. Besides, all of his self-worth was wrapped up in his marriage. As bad as it was on him and on me, it was better for him than the alternative. The alternative being not having her approval, her validation, and her love. He needed all of it. He had been conditioned, it seems, to an unprecedented degree of which I have not seen since, to validate his own life through his marriage. At times, I wished he would divorce her. This was when I was even still a young child. Yet he stuck it out. He was killed on a trip with my mother on their motorcycles. They would often take long multi-state trips on their Harleys, and a family member revealed to me that he did not want to go on that particular trip. He was busy at the business and didn't have time or anyone to cover for his absence. She insisted they go, and so they went. And I can't help but think that if he had stood up to her, that he may still be alive today. Now, that's not guaranteed, and I don't blame my mother for this. It was an accident, of course. But I do know this. My life, and perhaps his life, would have been much different had he stood up to her many years before. But standing up to her would have probably destroyed his life another way. So his need for her approval cost him everything, no matter what. Thanks for listening.